Hello.
Hello,
What's your name?
Abtar Berar.
When and where were you born?
I was born in Duncan, BC, in Vancouver Island, on July the 1st, 1934, at King's Daughters Hospital.
Okay, and can you briefly tell us about your family's immigration story?
My grandfather came to Canada in Vancouver, British Columbia in 1907 on a ship called Mont Eagle. Landed in the harbor at the foot of Berar Street in Vancouver. He was an uneducated man and happened to survive. Uh, and 17 years later, in 1923, he brought out his eldest son, Jaswant Singh, who was my father. So my father came here as a 17-year-old, had an education of grade 10 from India, which is equivalent to what I'm told grade 12 over here, and father worked in the 20s in sawmills, etc. Or before going into sawmills, he went to school. He tried to go to school in New Westminster, Duca Connaught High School, and took courses. And English used to be always a little bit of a downturn, but the rest of the subjects were great. And he even tried Morse code at one time, he told me, at Sproshaw College. And anyway, he went back to India in 1932 or 3, I think it was, and got married, and came back out in 1934 with my mom, and that was the year I was born in Duncan, BC. We lived at a place called Satlam, BC, one of the sawmills there, just south of Paldy, BC, and our community was quite large then, and they were all mill workers, etc. And after a year or two there, I think father then moved up to Paldy, and we lived in Paldy for some years, and he worked in the Mayo Lumber Company there.
Very nice.
So World War II had started, and my father then left from Paldy, moved to Duncan for a short while, and found a job in a Shawnigan Lake, a lumber company called Boyd Lumber Company. And so that's where I started school as a 6-year-old. And with a turban. My father believed in his culture, and he kept his beard and turban all his life. So I went through grade 1 with a turban, having to go through getting up early in the morning to get it tied by my father, and so on and so forth. So it lasted for a year or so, and then a man named Gundla Singh took me to the barber in the village of Shawnigan Lake and had my hair cut, which happened to be 24 inches long at the time. So my other brothers didn't have to go through any more of this, and so from there, a couple of years later, father moved to Lake Howichan, and there was a big sawmill being built there at Honeymoon Bay, and so this is where we settled, and myself and my brothers and sisters all went to school at Lake Howichan, all graduated from high school there, and our father always expressed education, and to always seek an education. So because he was raising 7 children, after graduation I worked for a couple of years in the industry to raise enough money to come to Vancouver to UBC. And as I attended UBC, I would work on weekends and summer holidays and so on and so forth to pay my way through college. And I finally graduated and got a degree, a Bachelor of Commerce degree in 1960. And then I was looking for work. And I got the opportunity to open a sawmill at Prince Rupert. and that kind of brought back some memories. My father used to tell me that my grandpa used to look for work going up the British Columbia coast, the Ocean Falls, Powell River, etc. Look for work, all the way up to Prince Rupert. And here in the 60s, now his grandson is going to the same place to open a sawmill. And once I arrived there, I just couldn't believe how the natural harbor that this mill was on. And so it was a real experience for me at the time. And I spent about 9 months up there, and then I came back into the interior of BC, in southern BC, at Oliver, BC, and then I was transferred to Prince George area, and this was with Northwood Pulp, again in the forest industry. And this was living in a camp and stuff over there. And after that, I came back into Vancouver and worked for a couple of companies here, and ended up working then with one of the largest consulting engineering companies in the world, H.A. Simons International, as a purchasing agent. At that time, I received an invitation to go to visit India on a trade mission, which was the highlight at that time of my career, and that was in 1966. And we got the royal treatment because we were on a trade mission with the BC government, and our minister was there, and Indira Gandhi was the prime minister at the time. And so I ended up seeing more of India than my parents ever did. And we went east, south, west, north, and after the mission was finished, we went to the village. And I saw where my mom and dad came from and stuff, rope beds, etc.
So was that the first time that you visited India?
That was the first time.
Very first time, okay.
Yeah. And I really enjoyed it. It was a great experience, and I could speak some of the language, so therefore I was able to communicate, you know. And then I got the opportunity also to go to Kashmir at the time.
Okay.
And so here in Srinagar, it was, what an experience again, you know, and it reminded me of Vancouver and our mountains and snow, British Columbia and stuff. So that stayed with me, well, and has stayed with me, and since then I've been back a few more times, and my last trip was in 2013. My eldest daughter Indra wanted to go back to see where the grandparents came from, etc. And so we did that trip in 2013, and it was quite enjoyable. And we started with the Golden Temple and went through the different villages in Jalandhar, Sharpur, and Ludhiana and stuff, and Chandigarh. Then did the Golden Triangle tour with the girls. And, so it was a good trip. Yeah.
I also want to ask you that, how was it for you growing up as a person from, of South Asian ethnicity in Duncan? Did you face any racism, or were there any troubles that you faced in school or as you were growing up?
Yes, I did. We had, because of the British Raj and India being part of the British Commonwealth, etc., that sort of continued here in Duncan and Cowichan Valley. My father, because he still has a beard and turban, wasn't allowed to go into a beer parlor. Therefore, there were two in Duncan. One of them allowed it, the other didn't allow it. But going back from those kind of stories from my father and then as growing up as a young person, I'd get called names and stuff, like Paki or Hindu or whatever and stuff like this, right? And anyway, that's kind of got over that, and then you went to school, you graduated, and so on. And then after graduation, a banker in Lake Cowichan told me, he says, listen, there's opportunities to go into the banking field. You'd have to go to Vancouver and apply. There are 12 openings for tellers. So I came to Vancouver and I applied. And you wait for a reply back, and you got a reply saying, thank you for your interest, all positions have been filled. So a little disappointing at the time. So then going forward, after I graduated from UBC, the biggest sawmill in British Columbia was in McMullen, and there's an opening there in commerce, in sales and stuff, which I was interested in. And there were 5 openings there, and so I went there and applied there. And again, the same answer came back, that thank you for your interest, and positions have been filled. Yet if I wanted to work for that company in the sawmills or anywhere else, there's no issue. They would hire you. But in the offices and stuff, you didn't have that opportunity. So you had to go through all that and to say, well, okay, I got to better myself, and how do I do this, right? So anyway, after H.A. Simons, when I came back, I enrolled in the Canadian Securities course and got my certificate and stuff, and was able to get hired by a company called Bongard Leslie and Company, which was a Toronto company. It was small. They hired me, and then it was a learning curve from there, of growing on, and I ended up joining Dominion Securities, and which is now RBC, which is owned by the Royal Bank. And so it was a labor of love for me, because I enjoyed the work and so on and so forth. And it took me a while to build up a clientele, and I grew up with a fellow named Herb Doman of Doman Industries, and he is from Duncan. And so I was able to get involved in helping or raising a bond issue for his company, $20 million of a bond issue, which was a big deal in those days.
Yeah.
And so it turned out okay. It was successful, and I continued adding clients and customers, etc., etc. And so I retired in 2003 after a 30-year career in the financial sector, and being the first Indo-Canadian at that time in this field. And today there are many young people doing this work.
Very nice. And another question that I want to ask you is that, again, when you were growing up, what were the kind of the demographics regarding the Punjabi community in Duncan? Was the community big in size, or was it a small community? And what did people used to do, say, on the weekends to socialize? Can you tell us something on those lines?
The community in those days, they were very, what should I say, they helped one another. There was no animosity, there was all friendship, etc. And we would learn from the certain yearly church events that went on. And for example, on July the 1st, Paldi, Gurdwara would hold a huge function. It was a Dominion Day, or now called Canada Day celebrations. And there'd be some sports activities besides the church activities, and everybody from Vancouver Island, from Victoria to Port Alberni and others, would all gather there, right? And then in April, the celebration of Vaisakhi was always done in Victoria. And the community would all gather there. And it was all, besides the church side of things, there's a social side and the activity of sports and all this stuff. So there was a lot of friendship, and this is how your friendship grew. So those were quite events. And then the third event used to be, they called it the Meva Singh celebration, and that was held here in Vancouver. And this is a fellow that killed a chap named Hopkinson over immigration issues in the courthouse here in Vancouver.
Okay.
And so that was always celebrated here in Vancouver. But going forward now to the current time, celebrations are held all over the place. You know, it's not because the community has grown so much. It's large now. Yeah.
Okay. Anything else that you want to share?
No, I'd just like to thank you for coming by to do this interview, and I fully support what UFV is doing here in trying to create a Punjabi legacy and try to implement this in a curriculum so that the young generation people of all ethnicity would be willing to or will learn about the Punjabi background and Punjabi history and who they are, and which would, I think, make it a better world for all of us. Yeah, so carry on the good work.
Thank you so much, and I would also like to thank you once again for taking out the time and sharing your and your family's immigration story with us.
Yeah,
Thank you.
And it was nice meeting you.
Same here.